Welcome to everybody today, and before we get started, I'd like to recognize Congressman Lilota from the great city of New York to say the prayer and the pledge. The committee will now come to order, and a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. As required by the House rules, a copy of the legislative measures have been made available to members and the public at least 24 hours in advance. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, all votes will be rolled to the end of this meeting. Good morning and welcome to today's markup, where we'll be discussing 7 bills that highlight our nation's small businesses and the burdensome regulations imposed on them by this administration. I'm going to be speaking on each of the bills we bring up today in much greater detail, so I'll keep those remarks as brief. To put it bluntly, Main Street America has been crippled by the over $1.68 trillion in new costs imposed by new regulations during President Biden's time in office. My colleagues and I on this committee have the privilege of being the Main Street's voice in Washington and began investigating how these staggering numbers are possible. We sent letters to federal agencies and questioned how they were adhering to the laws on the books that are supposed to insulate small businesses from the most damaging regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. The markup we have today is a result of the information that we gained through our investigation and the various hearings we've had on the impacts of these actions throughout this Congress. These bills are intended to prevent this type of harmful regulatory regime from being implemented by future administrations. By requiring government agencies to assess and limit the direct and indirect costs of their rules and regulations, federal agencies are forced to consider the interests of small businesses. Main Street America cannot afford more red tape, nor can they afford spend any more valuable time on compliance. They need a regulatory environment they can survive in so they can continue to fuel our nation's economy, and that's exactly what these bills seek to give them. I'd like to thank our members for bringing these bills forward for consideration in today's markup. Every piece of legislation we're going to look at today is the product of hearings and investigations we have conducted. Here on this committee, we know it's our job to put forward meaningful policy solutions that will help, not harm, our nation's job creators. They are already dealing with enough thanks to the current economic landscape. So we must continue to fight for Main Street America, and these pieces of legislation are a great step in the right direction, and I'm extremely proud to see how our committee is generating sound and responsible legislation that will free up our nation's small businesses to focus on their core operations. The policy solutions we plan to mark up here today have received statements of support from 50 stakeholders, including the American Farm Bureau, who is the voice of 5.9 million farmers across the country, to the National Federation of Independent Businesses, who represents 325,000 small businesses. They recognize these bills are not duplicative and are vital for small businesses to survive in the harsh regulatory environment brought by the Biden-Harris administration. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record, and without objection, it's so ordered. So with that, I'll look forward to today's markup, and I yield to the distinguished ranking member from New York, Mr. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of our role as members of the Small Business Committee is to recognize the impact regulations have on small businesses and where to find ways to balance the shared goal of minimizing the burdens and achieving the intended effects of regulations. Throughout committee hearings, we have heard that agencies have been better about considering the impact of the rules on small entities since the passage of the Regulatory Flexibility Act. To that end, the Office of Advocacy has been working diligently to educate and train rule-writing staff about their responsibilities. We have seen the fruits of their labor. The analysis agencies are conducting has improved significantly. Agencies are responsive to advocacy letters and have made meaningful changes to the rules to minimize the burden on small businesses. In fact, advocacy's efforts resulted in more than $90 million in estimated regulatory costs for small businesses in FY 2023 alone. Contrary to what we'll hear today, the process is working and federal regulations can and do benefit our economy. Let me share some examples. Regulations that protect our air and waters boost small businesses in the outdoor recreational industry, accounting for $564 billion of our GDP in 2022. Regulations to combat climate change protect small businesses that do not have the resources to recover from a climate disaster. With smart, well-crafted regulations, we can grow our economy, protect the health and safety of Americans, and limit the burden on small businesses. Moreover, smart, well-crafted regulations have the potential to unleash innovation. Small businesses all across the nation have found new opportunities to invest cost-effective and efficient solutions to pressing policy problems as a result of regulatory change. And regulations help to level the playing field for small businesses, enabling them to better compete against anti-competitive big business practices. Unfortunately, we will hear talking points that the Biden administration unleashed a regulatory onslaught on small businesses across the country, or that agencies do not take into consideration the best interests of small business when making rules. Let's take it for what it is: political themes for partisan gains. Let's look at the facts. The Biden administration proposed rules to improve the lives of Americans. One rule would make it easier to cancel subscriptions and speak to customer service agents directly, freeing small business owners of the hassle of being placed on hold, or endless automatic instruction will save them time and money. Unfortunately, the bills we are considering today will grind the regulatory process to a halt and harm the health, safety, and welfare of Americans and small businesses. This bill adds numerous procedural and analytical requirements that will complicate rulemaking and redirect limited agency resources without improving the process. Put simply, it is paralysis by analysis. This bill also mandates overly extensive information about regulatory impacts that will not only burden agencies, but also the small businesses that will have to provide information. This bill reflects many of the major anti-regulatory themes included in Project 2025, a radical plan to gut environmental, health, and safety protections. Even Larry Hogan, the former Republican governor of Maryland, has said there's no clearer threat to American values than Project 2025. To that end, I cannot support these bills and plan to support amendments to make much-needed improvement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Lady yields back, and does any other member seek recognition for the purpose of making an opening statement? Okay, if seeing none, we will now move to the consideration of the first bill. The first bill we will mark up is H.R. 8033, the Regulatory Transparency for Small Business Act, introduced by Representative Lukemeyer. I now recognize Mr. Mann from the great state of Kansas for an opening statement on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get started, Mr. Lukemeyer, the sponsor of this bill, isn't able to be here today. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert his statement into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My district, the Bickford District of Kansas, is home to more than 20,000 small businesses, and more than 80% of employees in the district are employed by small businesses. The Biden-Harris administration's burdensome and overreaching regulations on America's small business owners has wreaked havoc on small businesses throughout the Big First and across the country. Less than a century ago, the laws of the United States could fit into a single book, but today bureaucrats have filled enough volumes to fill up this entire dais, with the Federal Register of Government Regulations sitting at more than 90,000 pages. Between rampant inflation and high interest rates, a disrupted supply chain, and burdensome federal regulations, our small businesses are struggling. The last thing they need are more rules from Washington, D.C. that make it harder for them to make an honest living and serve their communities well. Unfortunately, President Biden and Vice President Harris have done just that, issuing more than 817 rules that have cost small business owners more than $482 billion and millions of hours of paperwork. This bill, the Regulatory Transparency for Small Business Act, forces federal agencies to identify the approximate number of small businesses that will be affected by the proposed regulation, the costs associated with its implementation, and to provide the data the agency used to make their determinations. We need more transparency. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay. If there are no other members who wish to be recognized, I would like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under current law, agencies are required to certify whether a rule would have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities and submit the certification and factual basis in the Federal Register. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say they are concerned that agencies are improperly certifying their rules and that it negatively impacts small businesses. However, the facts prove otherwise. If a certification is inadequate, the courts will overturn it. Agencies recognize this and understand the information must be meaningful to withstand a legal challenge. If there is a disagreement over the certification, the Office of Advocacy can send a comment letter to an agency expressing concerns. And for the most part, this process works. For example, EPA proposed a rule that will impose a one-time requirement to electronically report data related to asbestos. Advocacy sent a letter to EPA stating the agency improperly certified the rule under the RFA. When EPA published the final rule in July 2023, it provided an exemption to businesses with an annual sales threshold of $500,000 or less in any calendar year from 2019 to 2022, which saved $144 million for small businesses. Despite the mechanisms in place to hold agencies accountable, today's bill requires agencies to identify the approximate number of small entities affected by the regulation, the NICS code, and the cost per entity. That might sound good at first, but it is not that simple. As drafted, H.R. 8033 imposes a cost estimate for every proposed rule. Under current law, only economically significant rules are required to have a cost-benefit analysis. Let me put this requirement into perspective. The Coast Guard has issued thousands of rules to declare temporary safety zones for sport races, fireworks shows, and other public events. Why would we vote to require the agency to conduct a cost estimate for thousands of rules that will not impact small businesses? It is a waste of taxpayer resources. To add insult to injury, the information required by the bill is frequently unavailable to agencies at the proposed rule stage. That is why we have a notice and comment period, which allows the public to weigh in and provide rule writers with the information necessary to make informed choices. Because this bill makes the rule-making process far more burdensome, I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 8033, the Regulatory and Transparency for Small Business Act, will require agencies to show their work when determining whether a rule will have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. When agencies are drafting proposed rules, they must determine whether a rule will have a significant impact on a substantial number of small entities. If it does, then the agency must complete an analysis under the Regulatory Flexibility Act, or RFA. If it does not, the agency merely must justify that it does not. Certifying saves the agency the headache of doing an analysis. So oftentimes, despite the true impact of a rule, an agency, when properly certify that the rule will not have a significant impact despite evidence to the contrary. H.R. 8033 will require agencies to show their work when certifying that a bill will not have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities to ensure that a proper certification is done. They are already required to do this type of analysis, so as long as the agencies are following the law, there should not be much additional work. I thank the Vice Chairman of this committee, Mr. Lukemeyer, for his hard work on this legislation, which will address one of the largest gaps in the RFA process. If there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 8033. The clerk will report.
H.R. 8033, to amend Title V.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Do any members seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Okay, if see none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 8033 in favor of reporting to the House. All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
Okay, a member was okay, and for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to request a recorded vote.
Okay, a recorded vote has been requested and a roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the bill are postponed. The next bill we will mark up is H.R. 9032, the Enhanced Regulatory Flexibility Assessment Act, introduced by the Representative Malloy. I now recognize the bill's sponsor, Ms. Malloy, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's kind of uncomfortable for me to find myself in the position of advocating for more analysis or more red tape. I'm usually talking about how we need less bureaucracy and agencies need to have less power to hold things up. But the reason this is important is because the Regulatory Flexibility Act is supposed to provide some accountability and transparency. The problem with the regulatory administrative state is that agencies and bureaucrats are making decisions that have the force of law without accountability or transparency. So Congress passed the Regulatory Flexibility Act to increase transparency and help agencies make better decisions, but it included some squishy language that isn't accomplishing the goals that Congress was trying to accomplish. So the Enhanced Regulatory Flexibility Act requires agencies to answer questions like, why is an agency considering this action? What objectives and legal basis exist for this rule? An estimate of the number of small entities that are impacted, whether access to credit will be impacted, whether some entities will be more impacted than others. And agencies are required to actually respond to comments and concerns, give a detailed statement that includes an economic assessment, quantifiable description of the rule's impact, or a descriptive statement of why that isn't possible. And so that's the kind of agency action that benefits Main Street businesses and helps keep Americans freer and the government more accountable. And that's why I urge my colleagues to support the Enhanced Regulatory Flexibility Act, and I yield back.
Lady yields back, and are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay, if there are none other members to be recognized, I'd like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill adds a number of procedural and analytical requirements to the initial and final regulatory flexibility analysis. The addition of an estimate of the total impact of the ERFA will require agencies to look not just at the rule, but look at it in the context of all rules, as well as the past, present, and future costs. Agencies have never been required to complete this analysis, so the information is not even available. Moreover, an estimate of the total impact will also require an economic assessment justifying certification for ERFAs. This is just another attempt by the majority to require agencies to add a cost estimate for every proposed rule, which has never been required because it is cost prohibitive and nonsensical. The bill provides no resources for agencies to conduct this detailed analysis. Moreover, agencies are required to make sure benefits of the rules outweigh the cost, and this bill will ignore health and safety benefits. Americans want clean air, safe food, and consumer protections, and small businesses want a level playing field. They don't want these safeguards rolled back for big businesses. all under the guise of protecting small businesses. The addition of these very detailed FERFA requirements make it easier to overturn a rule through the courts and would deter the implementation of rules that benefit small businesses without improving the rulemaking process. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, which is just another page out of the Project 2025 playbook. I yield back.
Lady yields back. And I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 9032, the Enhanced Regulatory Flexibility Assessment Act, addresses a key issue within the RFA by requiring agencies to be more detailed and precise with their analysis. As currently written, the RFA includes flexible language such as where feasible and to the extent possible. H.R. 9032 strengthens this language and requires agencies to provide more descriptive and concrete details when conducting an RFA analysis. This committee has recently and consistently heard how woefully inadequate agencies' analysis of their own regulations are. This legislation aims to strengthen that review and ensure that if an agency expects Main Street to comply, they are doing their best to understand the impacts it will have. This bill closes a loophole that has been taken advantage of to force more expensive regulations on our nation's job creators. I thank Ms. Malloy for her work on this legislation and urge a yes vote. Now, if there is no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 9032. The clerk will report.
H.R. 9032, to amend Chapter 6.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Does any member seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 9032 in
Mr.
favor of
Chairman?
reporting it to the House. All those in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I request a recorded vote.
Okay. A recorded vote has been requested, and roll call vote is ordered. Now pursuant.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
are you plan to call for a yes or no? You vote yes, we vote no.
Okay, didn't we miss that? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, in the opinion of, okay. All right, seeing, yeah, right here. Question is now adoption of H.R. 9032 in favor of reporting to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
Okay, opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 9032 is agreed to and ordered favorably to the House. Sorry? Okay, recorded vote has been requested. A roll call vote is ordered, and pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the bill are postponed. Consideration of the H.R. 9030, the next bill is the Regulatory Agenda Clarity Act introduced by Representative Alford. I now recognize the bill's sponsor, Mr. Alford from Missouri, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Velasquez, for holding this important markup today. You know, this committee exists, and we say it time after time after time, but it's the truth. It's to champion Main Street, to ensure that small businesses that employ about half of all Americans can continue to thrive. And I want to make one thing perfectly clear. With all due respect, this has nothing to do with Project 2025. These bills today are for Project Main Street America, and we need to start telling the truth about that. Our role is to help lower the barriers. Yes, establish guardrails, but not roadblocks that stand in the way of small businesses in America, and to support the ones that already exist. A major impediment to small business is the plethora of rules agencies finalize each and every year that our small businesses are forced to comply with. In 2023 alone, Mr. Chairman, federal agencies collectively finalized $129.2 billion in net regulatory costs. These rules created 60.5 million new hours of paperwork each year for Americans. It's almost as bad as putting furniture together from IKEA, from the instructions they have, if you've ever done that. Small business owners are already straining under the weak Biden-Harris economy and skyrocketing inflation, and do not have time to read hundreds and hundreds of pages of new regulations they are required to comply with. To help these Americans, Mr. Chairman, I am proud to have introduced the Regulatory Agenda Clarity Act. a bill that would require federal agencies to publish their regulatory agendas in plain, simple language in the Federal Register. How can anyone be opposed to that? Additionally, agencies would be required to include the North American Industrial Classification System, codes of small entities that would be impacted by any proposed rulemaking. So thank you, Chairman Williams, for including this legislation in our markup today, and I hope that all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will agree that simple, clear language is a way to ensure prosperity for our small businesses, which is why we are here on this committee. Thank you, and I yield back.
Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay, if there are no other members who wish to be recognized, I'd like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting to hear the other side. Almost 2 months ago, it was referred to the Biden administration. All of a sudden today is Biden-Harris, but we welcome that. Currently, a regulatory flexibility agenda is required to be published in the Federal Register twice a year, along with a list of rules that have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. There are a number of requirements, including a summary of each rule under consideration, the objectives, and the legal basis for issuing a rule, and schedule for completing action on proposed rule. Despite these requirements, the majority doesn't believe agencies are taking their responsibility seriously. Instead, they want each agency, along with advocacy, to publish a plain language summary on its website and provide a brief description of the sector by the NICS code. The good news is most of this information is already provided on regulations.gov, and most agencies publish this information or a link to regulations.gov on their websites. Requiring advocacy to duplicate the work of agencies is duplicative and provides no additional value. Furthermore, agencies do not always know every NICS code or of every sector affected by the rule. That is what the rulemaking process is designed to do, get feedback on proposed regulations. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. I want to thank Mr. Alford for sponsoring H.R. 9030, the Regulatory Agenda Clarity Act, which will help streamline the regulatory information agencies posting their annual regulatory agenda. This bill will require agencies to post their annual regulatory agendas to their own websites, along with NICS codes of the primary impacted industries and a plain language summary of the proposed regulation. Main Street should not have to search far and wide in order to know what regulations are coming in their direction. Requiring agencies to post their agendas on their own website will be a good step in ensuring that job creators can adequately prepare for new requirements that may be imposed upon them. Agencies are already supposed to know how many and what type of businesses are being affected by these rules, so as long as the agencies are properly following the law, this bill should not impose much of a burden. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense legislation. If there is no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 9030. The clerk will report.
H.R. 9030, to amend Chapter 6.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Do any members seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chair, I would like to propose an amendment to 9030.
Okay, what, have an amendment at the desk, the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 9030.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The member is recognized to explain their amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to offer an amendment to the nature of a substitution to H.R. 9030, the Regulatory Agenda Clarity Act, as currently constructed. This bill would only impose unnecessary and duplicative requirements that would complicate the process and redirect limited agency resources without improving regulatory outcomes. A brief description and summary of the rule is already posted on regulations.gov, and some agencies currently post this information on their websites. Requiring advocacy to post the information on its website is redundant and provides no additional value to small businesses. It is also important to note that the regulatory flexibility agenda is a comprehensive collection of rules the agencies are considering and working on. Agencies do not always move forward with every rule. Requiring more detailed information at this pre-planning stage, like the NAICS code, may lead agencies to exclude rules from the regulatory flexibility agenda unless they are certain to move forward with the rule-making process. This legislation currently does not provide additional value to small businesses. Instead, it only burdens them and critical federal agencies with additional regulations that do nothing to help. My amendment will help achieve the majority's goal from this legislation by ensuring that the information that is currently posted on regulations.gov will be posted on agencies' websites within 5 days of the publication of the regulatory flexibility agenda, and that this description is written in easy-to-understand terms. Having experienced the challenges of running a small business, I recognize the urgent need to provide clear, concise, and accessible information to our nation's small business owners. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment to make these critical regulations more understandable for small business owners and all across America. I thank Chairman Williams and Ranking Member Velasquez for their time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and does anyone else wish to be recognized for a
Mr.
statement?
Chair, I seek recognition for rebuttal.
I now recognize Representative Alford, Missouri, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start out by saying one thing. I'll be more than happy to link Kamala Harris to the overburdensome overregulation in America that is stifling small businesses. This amendment undermines the intent of this legislation by removing the requirement for agencies to include the NAICS codes in their annual regulatory agenda and the requirements for the Office of Advocacy to also post agencies' regulatory agendas. These requirements are not burdensome. There's part of this committee that's more concerned about the burden put on agencies than the burden put on our small businesses. We should be looking out for the small businesses. This change would be immensely beneficial for small businesses, which may be looking for a better understanding of the regulations and the framework that they're required to work under. Agencies should be doing everything in their power to make sure that small businesses can comply with a regulation as easily as possible. Perhaps if workers at the Small Business Administration were at their desks actually working down the street here, they wouldn't be so concerned about what they need to be doing and these added clarifications that we're proposing here today. This bill makes incremental common sense changes that will help small business owners. I urge opposition to this amendment, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I rise to support the amendment being offered by Mr. Tenadar, and it makes common sense improvements to the bill. And what you are accomplishing here today is setting up all these agencies to fail. You are adding duplicative efforts that are already in the law, and yet you don't provide one single penny for them to do their job. It just doesn't make sense. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. And does anyone else wish to be recognized from a statement on this amendment? Seeing none, I now recognize myself for a statement on this amendment. This amendment would gut the purpose of this bill, which is simply to ask federal agencies to provide enough detail about rulemaking so small businesses know what applies to them. I urge opposition, and I yield back. And I urge all my colleagues to oppose this amendment. The question is now on the amendment, H.R. 90 to H.R. 9030, offered by Representative Tanduar. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, or the noes have it, and in the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'll ask for recorded vote.
Okay. There's been a recorded vote asked for and has been requested. A roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House 11, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed.
I agree with you. The ayes have it.
Does anyone else wish to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Lady is recognized. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 9030 offered by Ms. Chu.
The reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The member is recognized to explain their amendment.
Mr. Chair, I oppose H.R. 9030 as written because it's duplicative of current law and does not pose a clear benefit to the small businesses we intend to serve. Under existing law, federal agencies are already required to list the rules it expects to publish in their regulatory flexibility agendas that would have a significant economic impact on small entities. Adding an extra requirement for the Office of Advocacy to also post these summaries on its website is not only redundant, but incredibly burdensome to an agency that can't afford to spread its already thin resources even thinner. What's more, requiring agencies to post even more details for every rule that it is considering, not necessarily even publishing, is equally as burdensome and restrictive. This requirement is clearly intended to undermine the SBA's ability to issue regulations by putting up new administrative burdens designed to discourage the agency from pursuing new rulemaking. And by the way, I take exception to the comment made earlier on the other side that all SB employees are lazy and doing nothing. But these gross stereotypes are all throughout Project 2025, and this regulation is part of the playbook to bring the regulatory process to a screeching halt. Of course, we want to ensure that agency rulemaking helps small business, but this bill is not the right way to accomplish this. Instead, agencies should be engaging with small entities to ensure that the rules it is considering are effective and beneficial. My amendment would strike the language in the underlying bill and instead replace it with language that would require agencies to conduct comprehensive outreach to small businesses when developing their regulatory flexibility agendas. Specifically, this would include community-based outreach, outreach to organizations that work with small entities, agency field offices, and the use of alternative platform and media for engaging with small entities. These requirements are similar to the provisions included in the Biden-Harris administration's executive order to modernize regulatory review. And by the way, I have experienced SBA employees in my district, and I think they are very, very hardworking and have a deep desire to help small businesses. Rather than implement policies that would unnecessarily burden agencies with requirements that don't even pose a clear benefit to small businesses, we would be directing our focus to incorporating the perspectives and feedback of small entities from the get-go about agency rules that may affect them. I urge support for any amendment and yield back.
Lady yields back.
Mr. Chair, I seek recognition for rebuttal.
All right, I now recognize Representative Alford from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. Just to be clear, Mr. Chair, and you can go back and check the record for yourself. I did not say SBA workers were lazy and doing nothing. That has never been my contention. I think their focus is wrong in many areas. Instead of focusing on making it easier for businesses to do business in America, they're out registering Democrat voters in Michigan. This amendment is another unserious attempt to shield agencies from having to do their job and consider small businesses in every step of the rulemaking process. Representative Chu's amendment would remove any requirement for the agency to explain in plain, simple language what their regulation will do, as well as remove any requirement to include NAICS codes to help small businesses identify which regulations they have to comply with. It's not that difficult. To speak in plain words myself, this amendment would completely gut this bill and simply tell the agencies to do whatever you want to do. This amendment does nothing to address the problems at hand, and I urge this committee to oppose this amendment, and let's get on with helping businesses build their businesses in America and not contribute to the closing of small businesses, which is the fabric of America. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment? Okay, if no, this amendment,
Mr. Chairman.
yes, ma'am, recognized.
Mr. Alford wants agencies to provide a description by NICS code of each sector that may be affected for every rule, even if the rule may never come to fruition. It is busy work, and a far better solution is to get agencies to get out of the Capital Beltway, to connect directly with small businesses and learn how rules may impact them. That is why I strongly support Ms. Chu's amendment, which will ensure agency outreach and engagement to small businesses is happening at the earliest stage of the rulemaking process. This amendment will go a long way toward helping agencies craft meaningful regulations to protect our health and safety, but not unduly burden small businesses. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Lady yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment? All right, seeing none, I now recognize myself for a statement on this amendment. This amendment also gets the purpose of this bill by directing agencies to do something already within their purview. I urge opposition. I urge all my colleagues to oppose the amendment, to oppose this amendment. Now, the question is now on the amendment, H.R. 9030, offered by Representative Chu. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman,
Ladies recognized.
I would like to request a roll call.
All right, there's a recorded vote has been requested, and a roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. And does anyone else have wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 9030 and favorably reporting it to the House. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 9030 is agreed to and ordered favorably to the House.
Mr. Chair,
Seek recognition.
I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested, and a roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the bill are postponed. Next bill we will mark up is H.R. 9085, the Regulatory Review Improvement Act of 2024, introduced by Representative Musser. I now recognize the bill's sponsor, Mr. Musser, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My legislation, H.R. 9085, the Regulatory Review Improvement Act of 2024, is a step towards enhancing transparency, accountability, and efficiency in how federal agencies review the rules and regulations that impact our small businesses. As it stands, agencies are required to review their rules every 10 years. However, the current system allows these reviews to be delayed year after year, up to 5 times. without any clear explanation as to why. This creates an environment where burdensome regulations issued by federal agencies can persist indefinitely with little to no scrutiny. This bill introduces several important requirements. First, it mandates that during each 10-year review, agencies must consider public feedback through a comment period. This ensures that small businesses, entrepreneurs, and stakeholders are able to share how these regulations have impacted them, and forces the agency to listen to the stakeholders. Second, agencies will be required to conduct both a qualitative and quantitative analysis, looking at the actual costs, compliance burdens, and paperwork hours required since the rule was implemented. This is crucial for understanding the real-world impact these regulations have had on small businesses and communities. Current economic analyses employed by CFPB, SEC, and the Fed, among other agencies, are woefully inadequate. Finally, this bill demands action requiring agencies to determine whether these rules should remain on the books. We want to streamline the regulatory environment, not have it grow and stifle innovation. Since the Biden-Harris administration took office 3.5 years ago, federal rulemakings have added $1.68 trillion in costs and increased annual paperwork by 324 million hours. Small businesses simply do not have the ability to hire, extensive legal teams and lawyers and accountants to navigate the complexities forced upon them by these federal agencies. H.R. 9085 seeks to reduce that burden by ensuring federal agencies are actively reviewing and streamlining regulations. I ask my colleagues to support the passage of this common sense reform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay. If there are no other members who wish to be recognized, I'd like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Throughout the years, the issue of retrospective review has been a bipartisan issue, and one which Democrats and Republicans could work together to remove unnecessary regulations from the book. In fact, President Obama issued executive orders to reaffirm the need for agencies to carry out their reviews. More than 800 reviews were completed, with 70 notable regulatory provisions removed from the books, resulting in $37 billion in savings from paperwork reductions during his tenure in office. With that said, we have held a number of regulatory hearings, and this issue has never come up, nor have we invited any agencies to hear feedback on this particular issue. Legislation should not operate in a vacuum, nor should we ignore regular order. We need good data to legislate. We need to know which agencies are delaying the retrospective reviews, for how long and why. Instead, we just pull this bill out of thin air and require agencies to delay the review for no more than 1 year. What happens, I just ask my colleagues here, what would happen in the event of a national emergency like COVID-19? Would we have agencies delay getting the economic aid out of the door to small businesses and focus instead on retrospective reviews? I think not. And if you sit there and claim otherwise, I assure you this was not brought up once during negotiations because there was a need for agencies to be nimble. I have tried to no avail to reach a compromise with the majority to first determine the scope of the problem and ask agencies to make recommendations to Congress. Unfortunately, that effort wasn't particularly fruitful. Therefore, I will have no choice but to oppose this bill. I yield back.
Lady yields back, and I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 9085, the Regulatory Review Improvement Act of 2024, makes important changes to the agency's periodic review of rules. Agencies are required to review their rules once they've been in effect for 10 years and determine whether they should be continued or rescinded. Currently, agencies have the opinion to delay the review of the rules for a year up to 5 times, without giving a reason for doing so. H.R. 9085 would allow agencies to suspend the review for only a year at a time and then require them to give a rationale for why they were unable to complete the review within the time frame allotted. This bill will force agencies to review what regulations are already on the books and determine if they're still fulfilling their intended purpose. Further, when considering their review, our agencies will be required to offer a comment period for stakeholders to weigh in on the rule's impact over the past 10 years. It is important that we continue to elevate small business voices throughout the rulemaking process, including if past rules are still necessary. I want to thank Mr. Musser for his work on H.R. 9085, and I look forward to supporting it. If there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 9085. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, may I make a remark?
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, I think we all agree, or at least on this side of the aisle, that bureaucrats need bright lines, not guidelines. We're in a stage of our federal government where the burdens of big government are not neutral. They are very problematic, particularly for small business. This bill provides urgency, a requirement for the bureaucrats to do their job in a timely manner. And too many small businesses feel that they're pushing against the ocean. So such this amendment guts the entirety of a bill that will have such an impact in reducing regulatory burdens, and the onslaught from particularly this administration needs to be dealt with, and this bill helps do that, and it supports Main Street America needs. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask, make a parliamentary inquiry here? So the gentleman is granted 5 more minutes to speak on an amendment that have not been offered yet. And so we need some clarifications here.
Okay.
Is she going to be given the opportunity to offer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
All right, do any members seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay, there's an amendment at the desk, and the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 9085.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The member is recognized to explain their amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. We certainly have an obligation to ensure that small businesses across the country are helped and not hurt by regulatory guardrails. A key part of that is making sure that agencies regularly review their rules and see what's working and what's not. These reviews help agencies understand how small businesses would have been impacted by regulations and what rules are both overlapping or duplicative. Mouthful. This can lead to, these reviews can lead to cutting government waste and lead to cutting regulations that burden entrepreneurs unnecessarily. And to make sure that agencies are complying with that standard, Congress needs more data on how to successfully do retrospective reviews and how those have gone. And at the same time, we shouldn't be hindering agencies' ability to conduct those reviews. We can make sure we're not hindering agencies' ability to conduct those reviews at the same time that we're making sure that we're not hurting small businesses by adding uncertainty to the regulatory process. Therefore, my amendment would ensure that when agencies ask for a delay in reviewing their rules, that they give the public a reason why. It also would mandate that agencies report to our committee each year on whether they're actually meeting their review requirements, how they're conducting their reviews, and any legislative recommendations to improve the review process. My amendment does all of this without hampering the flexibility that agencies need to ensure that these reviews are done correctly. And I would urge and request all my colleagues to vote in support of this amendment to improve this piece of legislation and increase congressional oversight. I yield back.
Lady yields back, and does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment?
Mr. Chair.
I now recognize Representative Stauber from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to yield my time to Representative Muser from Pennsylvania.
I thank my colleague, and my apologies for jumping ahead. I'm just anxious about the idea of trying to improve the regulatory situation for our small businesses versus attempts to minimize or even gut them. We must accept the fact that our bureaucracies have gotten far too burdensome. Every small business will tell you that. Spend some time on Main Street, and we know that. We need to do what we can do to require the bureaucracies, the agencies, to listen to their stakeholders and provide information and handle regulatory burdens that they're deemed to remove or consider in a timely manner. That's all my bill does. It requires a sense of urgency, a time frame, to do their job and create assessments and to provide information so small business can weigh in on why it is so burdensome. So therefore, I greatly oppose any amendment to minimize my bill, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, I now recognize myself for a statement on this.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I would like to support
Recognized.
that amendment.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, let me applaud Ms. Davis for her thoughtful amendment, which will require agencies to report to Congress every 2 years on their efforts to conduct these reviews and include recommendations to make the 610 review process work better. I do not understand why asking the agencies to report back to Congress every 2 years will minimize or undermine the baseline bill. I support the amendment being offered by Ms. Davis, and I urge my colleagues to as well. I yield back.
Back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment? Seeing none, I now recognize myself for a statement on the amendment. This amendment guts the entirety of a bill that will have concrete impact on reducing burdens on small businesses and replaces it with a report bill. We've seen some of the outrageous regulatory numbers coming from this administration. Replacing this bill with a study is not what Main Street needs. I urge my colleagues to oppose, and I yield back. Urge all my colleagues to oppose this amendment. The question is now on the amendment of H.R. 9085 offered by Representative Davis. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed?
Yes, aye. I'm sorry.
We're even now. All right, here we go. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not.
Mr.
Yes, ma'am,
Chairman.
so recognized.
I request a recorded vote.
Okay. Recorded vote has been requested, and a roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and Rule 11, House Rule 11, further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. Yes, recognized. Yeah. Does anyone else wish to have offer an amendment? Okay. Seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 9085 and favorably reporting it to the House. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, so moved.
I request the yeas and nays to be recorded.
Okay, a recorded vote has been requested, and a roll call vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the bill are postponed. The next bill we will mark up is H.R. 9031, the Assurance of Small Business Act of 2024, introduced by Representative Stauber. I now recognize the bill sponsor, Ms. Stauber from the great state of Minnesota, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to speak in favor of my bill, H.R. 9301, the Assurance for Small Business Act of 2024. This year, we've held many hearings examining the regulatory burdens placed on American small businesses by the Biden-Harris administration. Across 17 different agencies, the rulemaking process has grown out of control, and Main Street America has paid the price. Over 700 regulations that have been added to the Federal Register since the Biden-Harris administration took office, costing nearly $440 billion and adding more than 236 million paperwork hours to our small businesses and family farms. We have an existing system in place that helps prevent burdensome regulations. The Regulatory Flexibility Act requires agencies to take into consideration whether the proposed regulation causes a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. However, individual agencies use various definitions of, quote, significant economic impact, end quote, and quote, substantial number of small entities, end quote, when considering a rule's effect. While one-size-fits-all definitions often cause more harm than good, agencies are creating definitions that benefit their causes rather than protect the small businesses. And with every agency using their own unique analysis to determine what qualifies as significant economic impact, it makes oversight extremely difficult. My bill, the Assurance for Small Business Act of 2024, addresses this concern. This bill will require each agency to submit to Congress their definitions used and a comprehensive list of factors the agency considers when conducting RFA analysis. This will allow Congress to keep proper oversight of agencies and hold them accountable to the intent of the FRA. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation as it will help ensure that the federal government does not further hinder the growth of American small businesses. Mr. Chair, thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? If there are no other members who wish to be recognized, I would like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not in the habit of opposing bills that call on agencies to report to Congress. In fact, a good data leads to good policy decisions. However, I cannot in good conscience support this bill, which amounts to nothing but busy work for agencies with little to no value for policymakers or small businesses. The RFA does not define the terms significant economic impact and substantial number of small entities. The Office of Advocacy has said this term should not be measured in absolute terms, and the office has developed guidance for agencies to follow. Despite this, the first requirement of H.R. 9031 would require every rule-writing agency to review every single rule going all the way back to 1980 and report on how the agency defined these terms. We already know that the application of this term has varied, and there is a legitimate reason why 5 firms in an industry of more than 1,000 regulated entities is not the same as 5 firms in an industry of 20 regulated entities. Looking back over a period of nearly 45 years, as this report will do, is a waste of resources. If my colleagues want to see the current guidelines for these terms, I respectfully suggest they look on agencies' websites. Even more troubling is the second requirement of the bill, which would have agencies report on a comprehensive list of factors, including the threshold analysis, the initial regulatory threshold analysis, and the final regulatory threshold analysis for each and every rule going all the way back to the passage of the bill in 1980. The scope is overly broad, and I am not quite sure what would be gained from this type of report given the lack of analysis. Finally, it requires agencies to report to Congress in 90 days, which is a short time frame to compile broad-based requests for data going back to the 80s. I suspect this is a messaging bill, and therefore oppose it because it lacks substance, scope, and requirements for solid analysis. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Lady yields back, and I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 9031, the Assurance for Small Business Act, will require rulemaking agencies to issue a report to Congress on how they define a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. There is no one-size-fits-all definition of significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. However, it seems agencies will use this to their advantage and use varying definitions to fit their own narratives. By reporting to Congress agency-wide definitions of a significant economic impact and a substantial number of small entities, it will be easier to hold them to their own standards. This bill will help our committee perform better oversight as we examine agencies that were following the law and are truly taking the interests of small business into account during the rulemaking process. I thank Mr. Stauber for introducing this common-sense piece of legislation and urge my colleagues to support it. If there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 9031. The clerk will report.
H.R. 9031, to require
Without
federal-
objection, the first reading of this bill is dispensed with, and without objection, this bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Do any members seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Okay, if no, seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 9031 and favorably reporting it to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 9031 is agreed to and ordered favorably to the House.
Mr. Chair, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested and a roll call vote is ordered. Now pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11, further proceedings on the bill are postponed. The next bill we will mark up is H.R. 9033, the Let American Businesses Be on Record Act, introduced by Representative Bean. I now recognize the bill's sponsor, Mr. Bean from the great state of Florida, for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A very good morning to you, and good morning, Small Business Committee. It's good to see everybody back. Let's review. If you've been paying attention to what happens in small business, we've had dozens and dozens of witnesses that run small business from all over America sit at that table right there, and they've come to tell us what's it like running a small business in America right now. And guess what they've told us? I'll review with you. They've told us these are the challenges, the top 4 challenges: skilled labor, taxes, inflation, and regulation. One of the questions that I always ask, have you ever seen it this bad? Have you ever seen regulations this bad? And they say, the majority, not all, but the vast majority, no, we've never seen it this bad. So during the break, I don't know what you did during the break, we went to work. The Bean team partnered with the Clay County Chamber of Commerce, and we did a roundtable. We did a listening session, and thanks to the Chamber of Commerce, Clay County Chamber of Commerce, invited dozens of businesses. We did a listening session at the Orange Park Town Hall. Thank you, City of Orange Park, for letting us have the town hall to invite businesses to come in and tell us what they're worried about. What are their challenges running small businesses in Northeast Florida? Guess what? Same thing, skilled labor, taxes, inflation, and regulation. Far too often, small business owners have to pay thousands of dollars. They have to hire attorneys that can speak swamp speak. They can have to challenge up with all the crazy town things that happens in this town. And often, government will issue these rules and regulation without even listening to Main Street. What will the impact be? We don't know. We're just going to do it. Today, members of this committee, we have an opportunity to change that. I'm proud, Mr. Chairman, with your leadership and your guidance, I'm proud to present this bill, Let American Businesses Be on Record Act, or you can call it the Labor Act. How about that? The Labor Act expands Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act panels to the Department of Labor. Department of Labor. You see right now, Mr. Chairman, everybody knows this that's been paying attention. Other agencies, the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they're required before they publish these crazy rules. Listening to Main Street, they have to have these panels where people get to have input of how this rule will affect them. Now, Mr. Chairman, your leadership and the hearings that you've held, we've held dozens, we all know the culprit in issuing rules without having hearings that is harming Main Street is the Department of Labor. For some reason, they're exempt from having these panels. So today, the Labor Act will change that. We'll ask this body and this bill, should it pass, we'll ask the Department of Labor, before you do any rules, what does Main Street think about it? How will it impact? So that's what we're doing. That's what the bill does. And I say to my colleagues across the aisle, this is one that we can all agree on. Can't we all agree? Can't we agree that before we enact any type of rules or regulations on the backbone of America, because that's what small business is, it's the backbone of America. We want them healthy because when small business is healthy, America is healthy. They're struggling right now. So let's do that before we put any more obstacles, any more things in their way. Let's hear how will this affect them. So with that, I ask everybody to join me in pushing this bill, the Labor Act, and let's get it done. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay. If no other members wish to be recognized, I would like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the RFA, 3 agencies are required to hold a SUBRIFA panels when the RFA is triggered: the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This legislation expanded to the entire Department of Labor. The purpose of these panels is to give small businesses a greater opportunity to provide input into the development of regulations. I agree with my colleagues that small business participation in the rulemaking process is vitally important. However, I disagree with this approach. SUBRIFA panels take time and cost money, and this bill provides no funding to the DOL for the extra work. The current process to convene a SUBRIFA panel at OSHA takes from 4 to 8 months. It requires 120 days of formal work with the Office of Advocacy and Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA, to identify small businesses to serve, hosting the panel and writing a final report. And prior to this interagency work, OSHA needs time to develop the detailed information and substantial analysis just to host a panel. OSHA currently dedicates a full salary to a number of technical staff, including economists and lawyers, for 6 to 12 months to carry out each panel. That is a significant undertaking, and substantial resources are needed to convene a panel. Again, and not surprising, this bill does not include any funds to pay for the additional work. And the bill to fund the Department of Labor in FY 2025 slashes funding for the agency by 22%. At the end of the day, today's bill is another messaging bill that is unworkable. It asks agencies to do more and more with less and less. Even the Office of Advocacy does not support expanding this requirement to all agencies within the Department of Labor. Expanding SUBRIFA to more agencies than needed will strain agency resources and potentially delay final rule implementation, which is unfortunately a goal of extremely radical Project 2025 playbook. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Lady yields back, and now recognize myself to speak in support.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah. Yes, recognized.
can I?
Now recognize Representative Crane.
I'd like to yield some time to Mr.
Arizona.
Bean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crane, and Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And to our friends on the other side of the aisle, you have just described, the regulation that will be put on the Department of Labor of all the things they'll have to comply with. Welcome to the world of small business. This is what a small business has to deal with all the time, of these wacky rules that no one ever considers what happens on Main Street. So with that, that's the irony of the speech
Would the
that
gentleman
that we
yield for one
can't. With
question?
that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Show me the money.
And I think the time still is Mr. Crane's remaining time. Gentleman yields back. Members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill.
Mr. Chair.
I now recognize Representative Stauber from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wholeheartedly support this initiative by Representative Bean from Florida. What he just described is what we have seen for the last 2 years almost on this committee. Every single small business man and woman that we've had at the hearing have talked about the rules and regulations, how devastating they are. As he spoke about going throughout his district and talking to small businesses, as we all do, it's the rules and regulations, it's one rule here, one rule there, that costs that small business a lot of money over time, and it's just getting, the bureaucracy is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just one rule and then another rule and then another rule. These small businesses can't afford a rule department just to keep up with these federal bureaucracies that are putting on them. I've owned a small business for 31 years. The rules and regulations must stop. We've heard it from the experts that we've had at the hearing, and this is exactly what Representative Bean is talking about. And I'm thankful he brought it up, and I look forward to supporting legislation. Mr. Chair, yield back.
Yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask the author of the bill a question, please? An inquiry?
You may.
Have you spoken or reached out to the Office of Advocacy on this bill?
Thank you very much for the question. I have not, but I have spoken to small businesses, and that's who this really affects.
But,
we need to
but
listen
do you
to our
know that the Office
constituents.
of Advocacy, that is the office that advocates on behalf of small business, is opposed to this legislation?
But Main Street is in support of this legislation, and those are my constituents, and that was the hearing that we did in Orange Park, Florida, regulations strangling small business. So let's let the Department of Labor listen before they just publish a willy-nilly rule. Let's let them listen to Main Street of how this will actually affect the bottom line business that's crippling Main Street across America.
Thank you. You answered my question.
Lady yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? All right, I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 9033, the Labor Act, will take an important step in holding one of the federal government's worst regulatory offenders accountable. This committee conducted a thorough investigation of the rulemaking process and found the Department of Labor is one of the worst offenders of Regulatory Flexibility Act's requirements. Their rules often fail to accurately account for their impacts on small entities. The Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act requires the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration within the Department of Labor to convene a panel of stakeholders for feedback on a rule that is going to have significant economic impact on a substantial number of small entities. Given the DOL's record, it seems only fitting that they too are required to conduct these panels. Now, it's better to get a regulation right than to move quickly and force it on the backs of small business owners before the agency can even understand the repercussions. I want to thank Mr. Bean for his work on this legislation and urge my colleagues to vote yes. So if no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 9033. The clerk will report.
H.R. 9033, to amend Title V.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Do any member seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 9033 in favor of reporting to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. Yes, sir.
May I request a recorded vote?
A recorded vote has been requested and a roll call vote is ordered pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11. Further proceedings on the bill are postponed. The next bill we will mark up is H.R. 7198, the Approve It Act of 2024, introduced by Representative Finstead. Are there any members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill?
Mr. Chair.
Now recognize Representative Stauber from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in support of my colleagues' Bill H.R. 7198. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They are the innovators, job creators, and driving force behind economic growth. In Minnesota, small businesses account for over 99% of all businesses and employ over half the workforce. It is no exaggeration to say that the success of our economy is tied to the success of our small businesses. We've heard numerous times this Congress that the Biden-Harris administration lacks concern for small businesses. Time and time again, they have pummeled small business owners with costly rules and regulations with little or no regard. Tools exist to stop administrations from over-regulating, but these tools must work for even the smallest of entities. We must provide easier pathways for small businesses to hold agencies accountable, especially under this Biden-Harris administration. That's why I am proud to co-sponsor my Minnesota colleagues, Representative Finstead's bill, H.R. 7198. By allowing small businesses to directly challenge an agency's, quote, certification and requiring agencies to be fully transparent about how regulations will impact the small business community, H.R. 7198 will take power away from unelected bureaucrats and rightfully return it to small business owners. And I want to repeat that. H.R. 7198 will take power away from the unelected bureaucrats and rightfully return it to small business owners. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation, as it will give small businesses a greater say in the regulatory process, which will only strengthen America's economic backbone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Are any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the bill? If there are no further members who wish to be recognized, I would like to recognize the ranking member to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congress passed the RFA in 1980 out of concern that uniform regulations disproportionately burden small firms. It requires agencies to consider the ramifications federal rules have on small businesses and gives the Office of Advocacy the authority to monitor agencies' compliance with the law. It is important to note that the RFA does not seek preferential treatment for small entities, nor does it require agencies to adopt the least burdensome rules. It mainly seeks to identify barriers to small businesses' competitiveness and to help level the playing field. Concerns have been raised that the RFA has become a tool for large businesses to obstruct the regulatory process. Unfortunately, the Prove It Act wouldn't solve the problem, but rather exaggerate it and give big corporations a hammer to wield against rules and harm the businesses the law is designed to assist. First, this bill creates an unworkable quasi-judicial process within the Office of Advocacy for reviewing agencies' certifications. It would allow any group any group that claims to represent small businesses, like Amazon, for instance, to petition advocacy to block rules that they do not like. It does nothing to prevent or limit duplicate petitions, which further bogs down the Office of Advocacy with numerous meetings and additional reviews. Second, it requires agencies to take into consideration the indirect effects of the rules in their regulatory flexibility analysis. Indirect costs are difficult to estimate. Agencies do not have the information available to them, nor do they have control over minimizing them. And if advocacy finds that an agency failed to conduct a required review of a rule, they could announce that the rule has ceased to exist. Agencies will then have to review the rule before it could be reinstated. Small businesses need certainty, and this provision would cause undue confusion. Requiring business owners to come into compliance with a rule only to remove it from the books and then reinstate it again isn't the safeguard I think this legislation was trying to achieve. I am afraid this bill will open the door for well-resourced trade associations and corporations to challenge any rule they opposed, possibly requiring advocacy to review agencies' RFA's compliance for thousands of rules issued each year. Why are we granting advocacy, which has not had a Senate-confirmed chief counsel since 2017, a vast amount of new authority? If enacted, the office will need to double its staff, and no surprise, this bill provides no new funding for the additional work. So believe me, small businesses, when the other side claims that they are here to advocate for you, ask them, where is the money for the agencies to do their job? This bill will do little to help small businesses, but it will certainly help powerful companies with the money to roll back rules that protect our health, safety, and the environment. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. I now recognize myself to speak in support of this legislation. H.R. 7198, the Prove It Act of 2024, is an important bipartisan piece of legislation which will help ensure that agencies comply with the intent of existing law and will give small business owners the ability to petition their government when an agency does not accurately account for a rule's impact. Small businesses do not have the resources to hire compliance officers, lawyers, or lobbyists to ensure that they understand and have their voices heard when the requirements are coming out across the federal government. Too often, agencies issue one-size-fits-all rule would make it challenging for small entities to comply or even keep track of. The Prove It Act will help agencies ensure that they comply with the Regulatory Flexibility Act and take into account small entities as they craft their regulations. The bill does three main things. First, the bill allows small businesses to petition the government when an agency does not accurately account for the impact of a given rule. Under the Prove It Act, small businesses and stakeholders will be able to go to the SBA's Office of Advocacy if they believe an agency has improperly certified that a regulation will not have a significant impact on a substantial number of small entities. Second, it requires agencies to consider indirect costs when conducting a regulatory flexibility analysis. Currently, agencies must only consider entities directly regulated by and impacted by a regulation they issue. We have heard time and time again, however, that this is not even close to the whole story. The downstream impacts of regulation are often just as, if not more costly than the direct costs. And in order to truly understand how impactful a regulation is, we must take into account all of the factors. And third, it requires agencies to publish follow-up guidance rules to the Rule on Regulations.gov. This piece of the Prove It Act is very similar to the Post It Act, sponsored by Mr. Molinaro, which passed this committee unanimously and passed the House on suspension. The Prove It Act takes important steps in ensuring that agencies comply with the intent of the RFA and consider small entities in their rulemaking process. And I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I yield back. If there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 7198. The clerk will report.
H.R. 7198, to amend Title
Without
V.
objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. with and without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment. Do any members seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay. So moved. Okay, there is an amendment at the desk, and the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
Okay,
71.
without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the member is recognized to explain their amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment will strike the numerous and analytical procedures in the Prove It Act that will enable big corporations to roll back rules and put small businesses on uneven ground. In its place, my amendment requires the Office of Advocacy to train agencies on how to comply with the RFA. Key personnel at every rule-writing agency will be required to undergo RFA training every 4 years. We have heard from advocacy that when agencies have a better understanding of the RFA, it leads to more meaningful consideration of small businesses throughout the rulemaking process. Advocacy has been working diligently to train staff, and we have seen the fruits of their labor year after year. Agency analysis is improving. This amendment will ensure that the office is reaching all agencies once every 4 years. Similar to the amendment offered by Ms. Davis to an earlier bill, my amendment will require agencies to submit a report to Congress on the respective review requirements under Section 610. The bottom line, small firms do not want to deal with the chaos that will result from the enactment of the Prove It Act. Most small businesses oppose deregulation. Business owners invested significant resources to comply with existing requirements, and deregulation will cost them time and money. Deregulation also leads to a patchwork of state regulations that make it harder for small businesses to comply with multiple requirements. They need certainty. Finally, federal regulations help to level the playing field and allow small firms to better compete against Goliaths in industry. I urge all members to support my amendment and oppose the Prove It Act. I yield back.
Lady yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Recognize Representative Stauber from the great state of Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in strong opposition to the esteemed ranking member's amendment. In fact, over 50 organizations representing small businesses from a wide range of industries have written in support of H.R. 7198. They recognize that this legislation is vital to reducing regulatory burdens and ensuring agencies consider the needs of small businesses when implementing new rules. It is both unrelated to the core of H.R. 7198 and is a distraction from the real issues that small businesses across the country face. Again, the ranking member, Mr. Chair, has talked about the Office of Advocacy. Several times that agency has been mentioned. I would submit that the folks that we asked to come to the hearings and testify, the ones that we've asked, not one small business has said, yeah, we need more rules and regulations. Not one. This administration, Mr. Chair, has put in over 700 regulations punishing American small businesses. The rules and regulations that are put on small businesses have been devastating. They come here on a weekly basis and tell us, if we say they're the engine of our economies, allow them to thrive and survive and be prosperous in our small town and large town America. These 700 regulations have placed over $440 billion, that's with the B, over $440 billion on the small businesses of America. Again, not one small business owner that has come to a hearing has said, we need more rules and regulations from these three-letter agencies by these unelected bureaucrats. Not one. We need to start listening to our small businesses, those men and women who want to be entrepreneurs that are out on Main Street, America, trying to make it. These punishing, these punitive rules and regulations have to stop. And the Office of Advocacy obviously is not being as good as they should. 700 rules and regulations. And I will just say, submit to you, Mr. Chair, these legislations are good for small businesses. And if it means that the three-letter agencies, the unelected bureaucrats in the three-letter agencies, Mr. Chair, some of them that have never owned a small business, Mr. Chair, if it means that they have to change their ways and stop the punishment of small businesses, well, I'm all for it. American small businesses are the engine of our economy. They're the entrepreneurs, and they make America move and grow and become prosperous. And this committee and some members on this committee don't seem to understand that, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized for a statement on this amendment? Seeing none, I now recognize myself for a statement on this amendment. Half of this amendment is the exact same as the one debated 10 minutes ago, and the other half changes the intent of the underlying bill. The approved act has been a number one ask for a small business group around the country as we discuss regulation reform. And as we have already mentioned, it brings small business voices to the forefront when agencies recklessly approve regulations without doing what is required in the RFA. If we want to truly help Main Street America, we should oppose this amendment and support the underlying bill. So I urge all my colleagues to oppose this amendment. The Prove It Act makes important steps in ensuring that agencies comply with the intent of the RFA and consider small entities in the rulemaking process, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I yield back. And if there's no further discussion, the committee now moves to consideration of H.R. 7198, and the clerk will report. Okay. All right. The question is now on the amendment to H.R. 7198 offered by Ranking Member Velasquez. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. And in the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to request a roll call vote.
Okay, a recorded vote has been requested. A roll call vote is ordered pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and House Rule 11. Further proceedings on the amendment are postponed. And does anyone else wish to offer an amendment? Okay, seeing none, the question is now on the adoption of H.R. 7198 and favorably reported to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the H.R. 7198 is agreed to and ordered favorably to the House. All right. I request a recorded vote on a roll call vote is ordered by me pursuant to Committee Rule 13 and ordered on House Rule 11. Further proceedings on the bill are postponed. All right. Now, the committee will now stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. We will reconvene around 2 o'clock after the first period of votes on the floor. Adjourned. Okay, the committee will now come to order. The committee will now resume consideration of the bills on which roll call votes were requested and postponed. We will start with H.R. 8033. The question now is adopting H.R. 8033 and ordering it favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luetkemeyer. Mr. Stauber.
Aye.
Mr. Stauber votes aye. Mr. Muser.
Aye.
Mr. Muser votes aye. Ms. Van Dyne.
Aye.
Ms. Van Dyne votes aye. Ms. Salazar.
Aye.
Ms. Salazar votes aye. Mr. Mann. Mr. Elzey.
Aye.
Mr. Elzey votes aye. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes aye. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes aye. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes aye. Miss Malloy. Miss Malloy votes aye. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips.
No.
Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolton. Ms. Skolton votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez. No. Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes aye.
I must have counted.
Mr. Mann. Aye. Mr. Mann votes aye.
Okay, are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? All right, seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the motion is agreed to, and H.R. 8033 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. The question now is in adopting H.R. 9032 and ordering it favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luetkemeyer. Mr. Stauber.
Aye.
Mr. Stauber votes aye. Mr. Muser.
Aye.
Mr. Muser votes aye. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes aye. Ms. Salazar.
Aye.
Ms. Salazar votes aye. Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Mr. Mann votes aye. Mr. Elzey.
Aye.
Mr. Elzey votes aye. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes aye. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes aye. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes aye. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes aye. Miss Malloy. Miss Malloy votes aye. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips.
No.
Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolton. Ms. Skolton votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez.
No.
Ranking Member Velasquez votes no.
I need to vote,
Sorry about that, sir.
if you don't want me to.
Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes aye.
Are there any of the members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
Motion is agreed to, and H.R. 9032 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. We'll now be voting on the amendment offered to H.R. 9030, offered by Mr. Tanadar. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Stauber. No. Mr. Stauber votes no. Mr. Muser.
No.
Mr. Muser votes no. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes no. Ms. Salazar. No. Ms. Salazar votes no. Mr. Mann.
No.
Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Elzey.
No.
Mr. Elzey votes no. Mr. Molinaro. No. Mr. Molinaro votes no. Mr. Alford. No. Mr. Alford votes no. Mr. Crane. No. Mr. Crane votes no. Mr. Bean. No. Mr. Bean votes no. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. No. Mr. Lalota votes no. Ms. Malloy. No. Ms. Malloy votes no. Mr. Golden. Yes. Mr. Golden votes aye. Mr. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Phillips votes aye. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes aye. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes aye. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes aye. Ms. Skolton. Ms. Skolton votes aye. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes aye. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes aye. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes aye. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ranking Member Velasquez. Ranking Member Velasquez votes aye. Chairman Williams.
No.
Chairman Williams votes no.
Are there any of the members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 11 ayes, 13 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the amendment is not adopted. We'll now be voting on an amendment offered to H.R. 9030, offered by Mrs. Chu. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lukemeyer. Mr. Stauber. No. Mr. Stauber votes no. Mr. Muser. No. Mr. Muser votes no. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes no. Ms. Salazar. No. Ms. Salazar votes no. Mr. Mann. No. Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Elzey. No. Mr. Elzey votes no. Mr. Molinaro. No. Mr. Molinaro votes no. Mr. Alford. No. Mr. Alford votes no. Mr. Crane. No. Mr. Crane votes no. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes no. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. No. Mr. Lalota votes no. Ms. Malloy. No. Ms. Malloy votes no. Mr. Golden. Yes. Mr. Golden votes yes. Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips votes yes. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes yes. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes yes. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. Yes. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes yes. Ms. Skolton. Yes. Ms. Skolton votes yes. Mr. Tanadar. Yes. Mr. Tanadar votes yes. Ms. Chu. Aye. Ms. Chu votes yes. Ms. Davids. Yes. Ms. Davids votes yes. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes yes. Ranking Member Velasquez. Ranking Member Velasquez votes yes. Chairman Williams. No. Chairman Williams votes no.
Okay, are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 11 ayes, 13 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the amendment is not adopted. The question now is on adopting H.R. 9030 and ordering it favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luke Demeyer. Mr. Stauber.
Yes.
Mr. Stauber votes yes. Mr. Muser.
Yes.
Mr. Muser votes yes. Ms. Van Dyne.
Yes.
Ms. Van Dyne votes yes. Ms. Salazar.
Yes.
Ms. Salazar votes yes. Mr. Mann.
Yes.
Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey votes yes. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes yes. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes yes. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota.
Yes.
Mr. Lalota votes yes. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy votes yes. Mr. Golden.
Yes.
Mr. Golden votes yes. Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips votes yes.
What do we?
Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes yes. Ms. Skolten. Ms. Skolten votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes yes. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes yes. Ranking Member Velasquez.
No.
Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes yes.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote?
Mr. Chairman, how am I recorded?
Tanador?
Mr. Tanadar is recorded as yes.
Could that be made no? Thank you.
Mr. Tanadar votes no.
Any others want to change their vote? Okay. Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 17 ayes, 7 nays, and 0 present.
The motion is agreed to and H.R. 9030 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. We'll now be voting on an amendment offered to H.R. 9085, offered by Ms. Davids. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luke Demeyer. Mr. Stauber.
No.
Mr. Stauber votes no. Mr. Muser.
No.
Mr. Muser votes no. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes no. Ms. Salazar.
No.
Ms. Salazar votes no. Mr. Mann.
No.
Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey votes no. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes no. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes no. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes no. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes no. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes no. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy votes no. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes yes. Mr. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Phillips votes yes. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes yes. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes yes. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes yes. Ms. Skolten. Ms. Skolten votes yes. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes yes. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes yes. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes yes. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes yes. Ranking Member Velasquez. Ranking Member Velasquez votes yes. Chairman Williams.
No.
Chairman Williams votes no.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 11 yeses, 13 noes, and 0 present.
Okay, the amendment is not adopted. The question now is on adopting H.R. 9085, an ordinance favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lutemeyer. Mr. Stauber. Mr. Stauber votes yes. Mr. Muser. Mr. Muser votes yes. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes yes. Ms. Salazar. Ms. Salazar votes yes. Mr. Mann. Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey votes yes. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes yes. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes yes. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes yes. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy votes yes. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips.
No.
Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolten. Ms. Skolten votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez. Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes yes.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the motion is agreed to, and H.R. 9085 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. The question now is on adopting H.R. 9031, an ordinance favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Lutemeyer. Mr. Stauber. Mr. Stauber votes yes. Mr. Muser. Mr. Muser votes yes. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes yes. Ms. Salazar. Ms. Salazar votes yes. Mr. Mann. Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey votes yes. Mr. Molinaro. Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes yes. Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean votes yes. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota votes yes. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy votes yes. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips.
No.
Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolten. Ms. Skolten votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu? No. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids? Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas? No. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez?
No.
Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams?
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes yes.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 9031 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. The question now is on adopting H.R. 9033, an ordinance favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luke DeMeyer. Mr. Stauber. Aye. Mr. Stauber votes aye. Mr. Muser. Aye. Mr. Muser votes aye. Ms. Van Dyne. Yes. Ms. Van Dyne votes yes. Ms. Salazar. Yes. Ms. Salazar votes yes. Mr. Mann. Yes. Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Elzey. Yes. Mr. Elzey votes yes. Mr. Molinaro. Yes. Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Mr. Alford. Yes. Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Crane. Yes. Mr. Crane votes yes. Mr. Bean. Yes. Mr. Bean votes yes. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Yes. Mr. Lalota votes yes. Ms. Malloy. Yes. Ms. Malloy votes yes. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips. No. Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. No. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. No. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolton. No. Ms. Skolton votes no. Mr. Tanadar. No. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu. No. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. No. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. No. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez.
No.
Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes yes.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the motion is agreed to, and H.R. 9033 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. We'll now be voting on an amendment offered to H.R. 7198, offered by Ms. Velasquez. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luke DeMeyer. Mr. Stauber. No. Mr. Stauber votes no. Mr. Muser. No. Mr. Muser votes no. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes no. Ms. Salazar. No. Ms. Salazar votes no. Mr. Mann. No. Mr. Mann votes no. Mr. Elzey. No. Mr. Elzey votes no. Mr. Molinaro. No. Mr. Molinaro votes no. Mr. Alford. No. Mr. Alford votes no. Mr. Crane. No. Mr. Crane votes no. Mr. Bean. No. Mr. Bean votes no. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. No. Mr. Lalota votes no. Ms. Malloy. No. Ms. Malloy votes no. Mr. Golden. Mr. Golden votes yes. Mr. Phillips.
Aye.
Mr. Phillips votes yes. Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman votes yes. Mr. McGarvey. Yes. Mr. McGarvey votes yes. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez. Yes. Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez votes yes. Ms. Skolton. Ms. Skolton votes yes. Mr. Tanadar. Yes. Mr. Tanadar votes yes. Ms. Chu. Yes. Ms. Chu votes yes. Ms. Davids. Yes. Ms. Davids votes yes. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes yes. Ranking Member Velasquez. Yes. Ranking Member Velasquez votes yes. Chairman Williams.
No.
Chairman Williams votes no.
Are there any other members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 11 ayes, 13 nays, and 0 present.
The amendment is not adopted. The question now is in adopting H.R. 7198 and ordering it favorably reported to the House. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Luetkemeyer. Mr. Stauber. Yes. Mr. Stauber votes yes. Mr. Muser.
Yes.
Mr. Muser votes yes. Ms. Van Dyne. Ms. Van Dyne votes yes. Ms. Salazar. Yes. Ms. Salazar votes yes. Mr. Mann. Yes. Mr. Mann votes yes. Mr. Elzey. Yes. Mr. Elzey votes yes. Mr. Molinaro. Yes. Mr. Molinaro votes yes. Mr. Alford. Yes. Mr. Alford votes yes. Mr. Crane. Yes. Mr. Crane votes yes. Mr. Bean. Yes. Mr. Bean votes yes. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Lalota. Yes. Mr. Lalota votes yes. Ms. Malloy. Yes. Ms. Malloy votes yes. Mr. Golden. No. Mr. Golden votes no. Mr. Phillips.
No.
Mr. Phillips votes no. Mr. Landsman. No. Mr. Landsman votes no. Mr. McGarvey. No. Mr. McGarvey votes no. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez. No. Ms. Gusenkamp-Perez votes no. Ms. Skolton. No. Ms. Skolton votes no. Mr. Tanadar. No. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Ms. Chu. No. Ms. Chu votes no. Ms. Davids. No. Ms. Davids votes no. Mr. Pappas. Mr. Pappas votes no. Ranking Member Velasquez.
No.
Ranking Member Velasquez votes no. Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Williams votes yes.
Are there any of the members who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, 13 ayes, 11 nays, and 0 present.
Okay, the motion is agreed to and H.R. 7198 is adopted and will be reported favorably to the House. Without objection, committee staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes, and members have 2 business days to file additional supplemental dissenting and minority views. Thank you all for being here today. If there's no further business, this concludes today's markup. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.